Hello and welcome to Setting the Stage, Episode 60, Todd and Skjaald Sagas. I'm here today with Todd to talk about Skjaald Sagas. Hi, Todd.
Hello.
Yeah. Well, before we get into talking about RPGs and stuff, we always want to hear about who you are outside of RPGs and stuff.
So my name's Todd. I am currently unemployed and kind of spend most of my time just going through my various creative outlets, doing various things like
hmm
the creation of Skjaald Sagas.
Do you have like a career like track kind of thing that you did before, or?
I've spent most of my life just doing odd jobs here and there.
hmm
I spent about, I think, 10 years in the forestry industry.
Oh, cool.
So that's where I spent most of my time career-wise.
Yeah, my sister's getting into that now.
Nice.
Yeah, well, cool. Yeah, it's she really likes it. But yeah, I can see why after 10 years you might not like it so much anymore.
It was I enjoyed it. It was definitely at a different stage of my life. I was much younger, much more active, so I could do it. So I don't think I could go back to doing it now, but
Yeah, exactly.
it was fun. I really enjoyed the outdoors part of it. I grew up in a small town up in the mountains and the forest and stuff, so it was just kind of natural to me.
hmm How did like D&D and RPGs fit into that? I think that's not usually an overlapping like
Yeah.
lifestyle and hobby.
So, I've always been a pretty just imaginative and really creative person. Just I've always played pretend, as a kid, obviously, and
hmm
that kind of. I mean, if you ask my parents, they would say I never really lost that, and I kind of played pretend a little bit too long into my adulthood. But
Okay.
so it's always kind of been part of my bones to do stuff like that. And then the unfortunate part is I didn't really get exposed to like actually playing like tabletop RPGs and D&D and specifically until much later because growing up in a small town I just didn't have the resources. I didn't have a group to play with and
hmm
also just didn't have access to any of those kinds of games.
Yeah. Yeah, you really need a community that has a couple thousand people for that to really take off.
Yeah. Or just those just a group of those very specific weirdos. We didn't have those specific weirdos. We had different kinds of weirdos in my
Okay.
small town. I
Yeah.
say weirdos lovingly, obviously, being one
No,
of them now.
I know what you mean. Like RPGs have a fairly big gate in front of them compared to other hobbies.
Yeah,
Not because of particularly gatekeeping within the community, which does exist, but just because it's hard to learn how to play if you don't have someone else bringing you into it.
yeah, definitely. It's not something you just kind of get into yourself. You kind of have to have that person,
Mhm.
like you
Yeah,
said.
yeah. Of course, there are people that do get into it themselves, but usually they have a large town where they can find the community that still helps them
Yep.
out. Okay, so you came to it later in life. Is there a story there, or just you stumbled upon it and were like, I I like make believe, and this is great.
A little bit of both. I had heard about Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it was always like that taboo thing of like, oh, this is what those really, really nerdy, really mathy people like to do, and it's
hmm
like we play as a wizard and this kind of thing. And I've always kind of been drawn to that sort of thing, just being really creative and liking fantasy and stuff. But again, not having access to it, it was just kind of in the back of my mind, kind of thing. Like, oh, okay, that's just a thing that exists.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it didn't happen. It's not like a huge story or anything, but it didn't happen until I really started to have a much more concentrated online life between jobs where I spent a lot of time playing a lot of video games in various gaming groups and spending a lot of time on forums like on Discord and Reddit and whatnot.
Right.
And I really grew those roots into the online community where I decided, you know what, I have this outreach to all these various people that have similar interests to me. Like, this is the time to, I'm going to go ahead and just play D&D. And so I found Roll20 and got on it, and that's where it all started.
Okay. All right. So you actually started through an online method.
I did,
Okay.
yes.
All right. That have you played in person? yet? Or
I actually have not ever played an actual in-person
oh,
RPG.
okay, all right. Hmm. I'm trying to think of like a parallel to that for other hobbies where that's
It's a
something that
little odd, yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, video games used to be like, you play on a couch next to your friend on a console, and now a lot
Right.
of it is just online instead. So it's kind of like someone who gets into video games that's never played on a couch next to a friend, but that's also sort of a subset of video game. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not the best
I
analogy.
totally agree. It's kind of this weird kind of middle space
Hmm.
because like doing it online, there is like that video gamey aspect, especially through virtual tabletops. But like it still has, at least from my perspective, it still has the tabletop bones to it.
Yeah, no, I play online with my friends now just because we've spread out over the country since we were kids when we first started playing. And that's just how it works now. That's how we meet together to play.
Yeah,
But yeah, there is a different aspect when you don't have like a really established group like that, where I feel like some people within the community view groups as disposable, kind of, where they can
yeah,
don't have to like observe social
I
rules.
could certainly see that. It's it's really funny. So my very first ever group on Roll20 that I got together with, so I just put out the Roll20 post like, hey, looking for group, looking for GM, because I didn't know anything about the game, so I wanted somebody to run the game for me, but
Right.
I wanted to curate putting the group together and everything so that I could make sure I get along with the people that are joining the game, and I have
Right.
a lot of say in that.
Yeah.
And so we all got together, and there were I think 6 of us players who all got on. We couldn't find a GM for about a month, but we would meet together weekly and just talk about like D&D and just gaming and stuff like that, and just hang out. And those first 6 people ended up being really, really good friends of mine for a long time. We've since kind of separated, but I still kind of am in touch with them, and they're friendships that I'll remember for forever. But I've had probably 30 other groups since then, and none of those have ever really stuck like those first 6 people were, and I think that's very interesting.
I think I would say it's exactly because of that pre-DM, like just hanging out and talking part
Probably,
of
yeah.
that relationship that established it a relationship outside of just playing the game. Like if I go into a card shop and play Magic with whoever's there, I might not really be developing a relationship with those people outside of the game. Whereas when I go to a friend's house to play Magic, like there's a relationship there that yes is centered around games and stuff, but like we're also like having beer and talking about the food that we're cooking and stuff like that. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah, so yes, I think you developing a friend relationship first actually was what made that group actually be friends. Um, and I think I'd actually encourage that for a lot of people that want to get into D&D is to play with your friends.
It's definitely better with a known group. Like
Yeah.
D&D, especially D&D, like 5th edition, like it's okay on its own merits and whatnot, but what really makes role-playing games just in general how amazing they can be is doing it with people that you can trust, and you can really kind of push your own boundaries and comfort and stuff and just do really incredible things.
Mhm. Yeah. It also makes it easier to like play a character kind of because the people are aware of what your personality is outside of that character. So you can do something that's like a bit ridiculous and it's not reflecting on you necessarily.
That makes a lot of sense too. Yeah, I didn't really think of it that way, but I could see that.
Yeah, like with my friends, not that I necessarily want to do this, but I can play a racist character. But I don't think I could do that outside of like my friend group. Um, maybe a
Yeah.
bad example, but you get what I'm saying there.
No, I actually think that's about as perfect of an example as you can be. Like you could it kind of goes along with what I was saying with where you can kind of stretch those boundaries of like they know that this isn't the person that you actually are,
Mhm.
that you're
Yeah,
just kind of trying something not because you want to be racist, but because like this is just something that exists and it's something you want to explore.
yeah, yeah, and I think usually that would develop into like a redemption arc if the
Yeah,
My friends are okay with it.
yeah. I think stuff like that's neat, and it's definitely like you said, it's not really possible without that like pre-built trust.
Yeah. So you started off as a player, of course, because that's easier. But eventually you transitioned into being a DM or a GM. How'd that happen?
It was mostly I would actually attribute a lot of that to the very first DM that group did end up finding. He came in and he brought us directly into his own homebrew world. We played D&D 5th edition, but we played completely homebrew world, and he had his own unique character building process where he would give like special quirks and unique items to each of the players that would then kind of adapt to them as they played. And that kind of just unlocked the inner tinker brain within me that I've always had of like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to do something like this. And then just GM brain took over from there.
Yeah, I think that was actually an idea from third edition that I also used for my campaign, fourth edition at one point. It's called, I think it was called Legacy Weapons.
Yeah, yep. That's exactly the kind of template he used. I don't think he did the direct like port over, but he did something very similar to it.
I'm not sure how well that would work in fifth edition because it doesn't have like the attribute modifiers like third did. Fourth also didn't have those.
We didn't really get to see our items and our legacy weapons and stuff like that really blossom because that campaign group was absolutely notorious for making very terrible decisions and TPKing. So
I honestly, for like, if you're playing for the first time, that's not that unusual to be sort of testing the boundaries of what works and
yeah,
suffering the consequences.
we all really enjoyed it though. It was fun.
Yeah. I think as I've matured as a player, well, I guess I'm mostly a DM, so I'm not sure I have matured much as a player. Um, but my players, as they have matured, I feel like they're taking less like physical risks with their characters in that way, and are more taking emotional risks with them for like the story beats that they're trying to hit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Anyways, you're saying like he gave you more confidence to be a GM?
Yeah, so just kind of the customizable nature of the way he ran his character creation and everything, just kind of it was like an inspiration. Like I realized that unlike video games where you go into a video game and you kind of have to play the video game that they design for you unless you have mods or you're good enough to mod the game yourself.
Yeah, unless it's an Elder Scrolls game, yeah, you're kind of stuck.
Yeah. Whereas he kind of showed me that like, okay, this is the game that they gave us, but we don't really have to play that. We can play it, but the way we want to play it. And so that just kind of unlocked the possibilities of what D&D could be for me. And that's what made me become a GM.
So your first campaign was D&D, or was it a different system?
It was D&D 5th edition,
Uh-huh.
but it was the very first iteration of what is now Skjaald.
Okay, so you've kept the same world. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I guess with a few changes, but I feel like
Oh yes,
that
so many changes.
that's of course true, even if you weren't doing a different project with it.
It was the very first campaign was actually a completely different timeline than any current ones or future ones will be on. It was set way into the future.
Hmm.
Once like all of the land had kind of been tamed and explored and everything had kind of just become mundane, and there was a lot of really tense political conflicts between the six different realms, and then all of a sudden this path through what was previously an impassable mountain range was discovered. And so all of the realms threw a bunch of armies together to go explore that. And there was a bunch of different treaties. There was a bunch of political intrigue and just various things going on. So it was much different than the current intended set of campaigns that I'm going to be running as soon as I start playtesting.
And have you run other campaigns in the world since then?
Yes.
I guess set in the present, because you said that was the far future.
Yeah, they would be the other ones I ran. I ran three other ones that were set within what would be considered the present.
I feel like the present, I'm assuming, is like the normal medieval-esque thing for.
Yep.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about the world, and I'd like to hear about the system that you're working on as well. But I think we'll do that second. So
Yeah.
Skjaald, from what you'd written, there's like a theme for this setting. So why don't you talk about like the theme and the feel for the world before we get into like the more detailed stuff?
So to kind of boil it down to my inspirations for Skjaald, it would really come down to a mixture of I really like dragons, and my favorite fantasy series of novels is the Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind.
It's a good one.
And I just really wanted to take the whole magic and life being intertwined and like life actually being a kind of like a byproduct of magic and run with it. And because I like dragons and whatnot, I decided to tie it to dragons. Like dragons are kind of the source of magic, and then magic is the source of life, kind of thing. So it's got this really weird intertwining thing where one can't live without the other can't live without the one. And
Okay.
it's in its current state, it is a very zoomed in version of the world. Even though the world is called, it's named Skjaald, but in reality, I only have shown one continent within it called Driktsuung, and uh, I kind of did it that way, even though Driktsuung is big enough and varied enough that it is kind of a world to itself within the world of Skjaald. But I did it that way to give me room to expand into other avenues and kind of introduce new kind of cultures and new ideas and stuff.
Yeah. I think that's fairly typical for fantasy settings. Like the Forgotten Realms, like Faerun is a continent on the planet of Toril. And it's not even a whole continent because the edges of the map are still land for the north and
Gotcha.
the east. Um,
I actually didn't even know that.
yeah, Pathfinder is the same thing where the most of it, like Golarion is the world, but then the focus is on the inner sea region, which is sort of like the Mediterranean kind of
Gotcha.
for a lot of their content, and then the other 5 or 6 continents are there, but not the focus.
Right.
It's even more ridiculous for the Galarian one because they have like 11 planets that are all inhabited in their
Yeah,
solar system. Yeah,
and
they're
they kind of go a little bit on the back burner at times. Yeah.
those. I like. It's interesting that they're like, oh, we have all these other planets that have stuff on them, and it's kind of like, why? Why is that necessary?
True.
Well,
I think
we're
maybe
we're here to talk about you.
they were trying to plan on like expanding into Starfinder, like even when they started doing Pathfinder. So maybe that's like why.
I think that's true because the supplement that described the planets came out closer to when Starfinder came out. So it might not have been their original conception for the world, but then they just said, let's expand it and make this work so that you can transition into Starfinder really
Yeah,
easily if you
they
want
just
to.
wanted them to tie together.
Yes, definitely. I think even one of the races in Starfinder actually ended up being placed into Galarian as well.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, the rat people, Yosoki, they're a Starfinder race that then got placed in the Tian Sha region of Galarian.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, so Skjald, so you have a continent. What was it? Discoon?
Driktsuung.
Driktsuung. Okay, I gotta write that down. So okay, so Driktsuung, which is the main continent where the action takes place, and we don't have to care about the other ones. Was the whole point of my digression there.
Fair enough.
So yeah, let's talk about the continent. So is it like temperate? Is it desert, tundra? What's the deal for the
It's
like physical nature of it?
as I was kind of implying a little bit earlier, it's kind of a world in of itself.
Hmm.
It has a wide variety. So it's got like super high mountain peaks. It's got the lowland like fertile valleys. It's got rolling grasslands. It's got Great Plains, rocky highlands. It's got a big desert kind of right off the middle. It's got some marshlands towards the south. It's got a little bit of everything. Not quite everything that like Earth would have, but for you could pretty much have any kind of adventure in any kind of biome you would want, other than the very, very specific ones.
Okay, so kind of like North America or South America, or I guess China is also a bit like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, very much like that. Why am I saying a bit? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So very varied in biome, as you said. And what about like culturally? Is it sort of unified? There was like a Roman Empire 100 years ago, and everybody is Roman, and or is it more diverse than that?
So I've diversified it quite a bit. There are 6 primary realms, because I don't really know what else to call them, because their governments vary so widely.
Well, I think it's a good name because you have Skjaald, so you have that like sort of Norse thing within the name, and then that has the 9 realms within the Norse cosmology. So having the 6 realms in your thing makes a lot of sense with the naming.
I actually hadn't even made that connection, and I like it even more now.
I, I
So,
thought that was so obvious that you had done it that way. Okay.
so when I came up with the name Skjald, I had never even heard the term Skjal, like the Norse term for like the storyteller or whatever it is. Like, so I didn't even know that
Right.
was a
Yeah.
word. I literally just liked the sound of the word coming out of my mouth, and so that's what I chose for the name. So,
Okay. Well, you
but
spelled it right,
but
I guess.
it
Well,
does
almost.
have kind of Norse-ish ties throughout it, so it actually fits really really well, which is completely by accident.
Okay. Well, great, great. Okay. So the 6 realms.
So they range from like the very nomadic, the strong lead in the north to the very uh, like diplomatic and democratic, like science will lead us type people to the south, and kind of a little bit of everything in between. There's like a democratic presidential government. There's
Hmm.
the tribal war chief, and then there's like the monarchies of like the dwarves and the elves that are through bloodline, and kind of a little bit of everything all over the place.
Okay. So you've got all like the standard D&D races, like humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, kind of stuff.
I do. Mine take on. I have my own little twist to all of them, but yeah, they would seem familiar at least to a degree.
Okay. Yeah. So the dwarves still live in mountains and
Yeah,
make metal and jewelry and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. I think a lot of those actually come from Norse stuff as well. So keeping that theming makes sense.
Yeah, like I guess another when it comes to inspirations, another big inspiration was Warhammer Fantasy. Have a lot of not quite copies, but we'll call them heavy leanings into a lot of those sorts of things.
Well, it's popular lore, so yeah, that's cool. Do you have the other races from Warhammer, like the goat people and stuff like that?
Not currently, but I plan on expanding into them.
Okay.
So the my kind of design philosophy between what I'm offering as lore and like playable stuff is how to put it. So I almost want to design it from a storytelling aspect of like I don't want to over develop a bunch of things like races. Like I have a couple races that I technically have ready to be like playable races, but I'm not putting them into any of my content yet because know I haven't had an adventure actually meet these races yet. So
Hmm.
I don't want to offer them until they're actually met as NPCs first, and then I'll open them up to actually being playable, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, like giving people the context for something. And from a marketing publishing perspective, it gives people a reason to buy books.
Fair. Very fair.
Yeah. Well, I did want to hear like you said there was the 6 nations. Can we go through the 6?
Yeah. Um, so the largest, the one to the furthest north on the continent is called Vormsker. It's the home of the nomadic kind of. It's a collection of tribes that have like they all have their individual like tribe chief, but then there is like a head chief among them that rules kind of everybody, and they're very strength based. Like the strongest person is the leader of everybody, and that's just how they do trials by combat, turn your place in within the hierarchy and stuff like that. Um, and
Okay.
by nature, they're very aggressive and violent, and are usually the ones at war with their neighbors. If there's nothing else going on, they'll say, "Hey, we want your stuff, give it to us," kind of thing.
All right. Yeah, so kind of that like orc mentality from
Yeah,
D&D a little bit.
yeah, very much so. It's probably kind of the middle ground in terms of the various races that are within that realm or that nation. They have a variety, but they're not the most varied out of all of them, if that makes sense. They're very middle ground. They've got humans, they've got dwarves, they've got Goliaths, they've got halflings, although typically elves and gnomes and the like don't, they're not quite so naturally gifted in terms of strength and durability and whatnot, so they don't often fare well up there, so you don't see too many of them.
Yeah, and my concept of this for orcs within my campaign, there are other races there, but they're kind of like a servant class within the tribes.
Makes sense. That fits really well with the thematic too.
Yep.
But they're on in terms of like technological scale, they're probably at the bottom. They're still very much in the past. They still use like animal shamans and use like beasts of burden like oxen and horses and stuff to do most of their manual labor and whatnot.
Or they're like machine labor and at this point in your setting?
Not entirely like not to the level of like steam engines or anything like that, but there's a bit of engineering. Like there are pulleys and stuff like that to like augment manual labor.
Okay. So we got most of the world is in like 14th, 15th century level tech, and these guys are stuck in 9th century or something.
Yeah, they're a bit behind. They're not like completely savagely primitive. Like they can hold their own. They know metalworking and not like that, but they just they don't have any kind of industry or.
Okay, I think I get it. All right, so that's Vormskir. And I guess going down from the top, we got Ellen Way next. Is that right?
Yeah, so Ellen Way is on the western coast, and it borders on Vormsker and Bulgo. Ellen Way is the it's primarily dominated by a bunch of very dense, very large forests. Think of the Californian redwoods type forests,
Mm-hmm.
and like the North American Pacific Northwest type forests. And it's where the elves live. Albeit the elves in my setting are not just the like lightweight, pointy-eared, skinny humans with long hair. Elves are very kind of alien in nature. They actually came from another place. They didn't originate on Skjaald. Nobody knows
Okay.
where they came from. Not even they remember where they came from. Much like Tolkien's elves, they're technically immortal in the sense that they don't suffer from old age or anything like that.
Are you an ElfQuest fan?
I have heard of it, but no, I am not a fan.
Okay. It's a very similar origin story.
Oh, really?
Yes.
It seems I've stolen more than I realize.
I think it's actually fairly common to have elves be like actual aliens from like another planet, or plane of existence or something.
That kind of makes sense. Like even Tolkien kind of does it. Like they're from like the Grey Havens or whatever, or at least they
Yeah, which
return
is
to the
another
Grey Havens.
continent, but whatever, same thing. But yeah, Tolkien did it, and it's true in Norse mythology, and Pathfinder does it, ElfQuest does it, The Witcher does it. So yeah, it's
It's all throughout everything.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's fairly consistent.
but yeah, I actually structured my elves to where the various like sub races of elf you see in most fantasy settings are
Hmm.
they still somewhat exist within Skjaald. The primary difference is they're not actually different types of elves. They're the same elf going through a different stage in their life. Like throughout
Oh,
various
okay.
stages, they'll go into like a sleep like coma and they'll actually physically change, like their physical features and stuff will change and they'll like have
They
this
go into their cocoon and they
yeah
come out different.
yeah
Okay.
and like as they age and like these life stages can be like 100 to 300 years long and like so they're you can be a quote unquote wood elf for as long as anybody who knows you is alive, so all they ever know you as is a wood elf.
Hmm.
And because of the changes that you go through during your cocoon phase, like you come out almost a different person. Even though you're the same person, you still have the same connections and everything, but just it's such an experience that you're different in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense.
And then the more life stages you go through, the more you start to kind of revert back to your otherworldly like physical state. So you get more and more alien looking, and once you get to the one of the final stages, which is called the celestial elf, you are basically one of the grays from like sci-fi, like big headed, black eyed, gray alien.
You got to go read ElfQuest, man.
Isn't this basically the same thing? I'll have to go read it then.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge series, but it is all available online through the creator's website. Well, most of it. But yeah, they also have cocoons, which can be used for transformation into a higher form, where they go from like wood elves to high elves. And yes, the final stage is a gray, basically.
That's wild. I cannot believe that.
Yeah, I'm stunned that you haven't read it.
That's so
I've come
weird.
up with almost the same thing. That's so cool.
I like not only have I not read it, like I basically only know of ElfQuest by name. I've never actually like I've never seen any kind of snippets of it or anything. It's 100% like completely foreign to me. Well, apparently it's not because it's in my game.
It's a really really good comic. Like a lot of comics in the U.S. are like superhero comics, whatever.
Yeah,
But this is one that's like good storytelling and still like interesting fantasy. Wonderful stuff.
that's wild. I'm gonna have to. I have to go look at it.
Yeah, I'll send you a link when we're done.
I would appreciate that.
Okay, so we got the elves in Ellen Way, and they're proceeding through life stages, which I'm assuming is. I'm curious where dark elves fit in there because they're a bit different than all the other ones.
Yeah. So what dark elves are is they're somewhat of a mutation. So it's basically I guess a piece that I missed out, a pretty important piece, is not only are they immortal, but they are also like bound to each other's spirits. And so any new elves that are born are not actually technically new elves, they're just reincarnated old elves. So like an old spirit just inhabits the new body and they go forth. And so because of this process, they're connected to all the other spirits within their family line.
Does it also mean that they're like have a finite population number?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does. And during times of like heavy war, it's like the elves are very war averse because of that, and because if you go to war, you lose a lot of people. Then all of a sudden, you have even fewer people than you had before, and there's no real good way to get your numbers back up. So, yeah, it is a constant running theme for the elves to avoid conflicts with other races, and it's kind of why they've retreated into the dense forest area of Ellenway because it's a lot easier to hide and it's a lot easier
Hmm.
for other kind of come in and get you without just saying fucking burning the whole forest down.
I thought they might have had a different opinion of it, where they view their lives as more like disposable because I'll just come back as long as the race isn't extinct entirely.
That's an interesting perspective that I did not consider. I could imagine that a good many of them probably especially towards like the lower life cycles would see that. But I think the nature of like how long it takes them to get to quote unquote their true forms, they would kind of revere that time that they spent in their current status and wouldn't want to start over kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that like that's maybe just a cultural understanding and maybe there's like a group of elves that are like that.
Yeah,
Or
I definitely think that that perspective is definitely worth like exploring and like having like a subset of maybe like a bunch of rambunctious elves like we deserve this world kind of thing, like we need to go take it and there's nothing stopping us, like they can't kill us forever sort of thing.
yeah. Well, I could also see this like that maybe there was some event a long time ago where the elves did that and suffered some consequence because of it, and now there's like it's a cultural taboo to treat your life that way.
Ooh, that's a good idea. I just have to quietly take notes here real quick.
Oh man, well, it's cool though. I like the idea.
I'm always looking for ideas, always.
I'm guessing this is also connecting to what you were saying earlier about dragons and magic and life all being connected.
Yes, for the most part, elves, just like every other fantasy series you ever see elves in, they're kind of the special poster child of everything, where they're a little bit detached, and I plan on eventually exposing that they have their own connection to a different kind of magic, but I still need to do a little bit more exploration on exactly what that means and everything before I really dive into that. So that's
Okay,
definitely coming, but not for a while.
gotcha.
But so to answer your question, yes, they are connected, but not quite in the same way as anybody else.
Okay.
And to go back to what you were referring to with the dark elves being so different, as an elf goes through these changes to go to the different life cycles, because of their connection to their ancestral spirits and whatnot, there's opportunities for those other spirits to try and kind of intervene and take over the body during this transformation, kind of oust out the current resident and become the elf in question at like when they come out of this transformation in this cocoon.
Now we have the Dune references. Yeah. All right.
Another series I have wanted to watch but have not watched or read anything about.
Okay. Well, I don't blame you for that one. It's thick.
It is very thick, and that's where my trepidation has come in with. I don't know if I want to quite commit to that because once I do, I have to go through the whole thing.
Oh man, I don't even. I read the whole thing before it got even further expanded by the son of the original author, and because he's still writing more stuff. So I caught up to where he was,
Oh,
and I said,
wow.
"That's enough. I'm done." Um, and even then, I felt like, this was fun, but really the first three, four novels are sufficient to like get these are really good experience, and the other ones feel more like,
Yeah.
yeah, I like the world. This is cool. Um, but yes, I can also see like this is too much. I don't want to get into it, and staying away from it because of that.
It's definitely something I want to do. I just want to make sure I do it the right way. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to go in and just kind of
Mm.
do it halfway and then not get the full experience as intended. But yeah, so these souls kind of invade, and then if it doesn't oust the current resident, then they kind of merge, and
Oh,
then
okay.
that's when the transformation goes wrong and creates a dark elf. And that process actually completely cuts the two spirits off from their connection to all the other like ancestral spirits, and they become completely isolated from the rest of their race, like
Okay.
psionically or however you want to explain it. So they become very deranged most of the time.
So in that circumstance, they're cut off, and does that mean when a dark elf dies, they don't reincarnate the way the other ones do?
Yeah, they would kind of just be lost to the ether.
So that sort of possession, they become a dark elf when it doesn't work and they merge, right?
Yeah, that's when neither spirit can kind of oust the other spirit, so they're stuck in this constant. struggle, and then the transformation kind of gets to a point to where they can no longer get out. So
Okay.
neither can hit the eject button, so they're just stuck in there together.
And in the other circumstance where the older spirit takes over the body, is that a different spirit, or is that just like a past life of that spirit itself, I guess is another way of looking at it.
That's a really good question. So it kind of would be that. It's a little bit of both. Because they're always linked. So it is kind of just a constant changing of past lives. So it would be just a past life or future life, you could even consider it, because they're constantly revolving.
I'm just trying to think of that from like a human perspective of like being possessed by myself as a toddler. I mean, not exactly the right way of putting it, but like, that's
Yeah, but it's yourself as a toddler that is also
yeah.
40 years old that lived way back when. It's like both at the same
Yeah, you know
time,
what I
but
mean? Look,
also
with the
neither.
reincarnation aspect, like if humans reincarnate, it's hard
Yeah,
to consider those reincarnations like as fully you compared to like myself as a toddler. Yes, that was me,
yeah,
but that's not the person you're talking to right now, right? Like,
right. I would actually almost look at it from the opposite viewpoint. It would almost be like if you were going to go and try and kick out you as a toddler right now. Like you were going and you're like, okay, you're not going to be able to run this life the way you should. I need to take over. So you go in and you take little toddler
yeah,
spirit
well,
you
you
and
know
you
what? I
throw
know better than
yourself
that.
out so that you can live the life again.
Yeah, I'm smarter, aren't
Yeah,
I?
you live the life.
That
And there's definitely some like hand waviness to where like, okay, why don't elves know everything all the time, and why aren't they just good at everything? So like there's definitely some like forced amnesia stuff that happens that isn't really super easily explainable, and some plot holes, but
I think D&D elves had a thing for that where they had like when they do a long rest, they can like swap around their proficiencies a little bit.
yeah, during their trance. And I think that's kind of what initially inspired it, because Skjaald started out just as 5e homebrew. So a lot of it has a lot of roots to me just trying to make
Mm-hmm.
a a 5e homebrew game that eventually just kind of took on legs and became their own thing.
Tale
But
as old as time in game design.
yeah, I still do. The elves still have trance and everything. It's a little different in that it's like not necessarily just like this sleep without sleeping. You're actually like fully
Okay,
connecting to like the spirit realm and talking to your ancestors and stuff like that.
I like that better actually. That sounds more evocative than just it's sleep, but not.
Yeah, I never really liked the idea that elves just got to meditate all night and never really had to sleep in fifth edition. So I was like, no, you still get all the like penalties of being asleep because you're in this deep trance, but
Yeah.
you're not actually sleeping. If that makes sense.
Okay. Spent a lot of time in the elves there, but that was fun. Let's talk about Bolgo next.
Bulgo is the very center of the continent. It basically it is a kingdom of dwarves that is within the largest mountain called Karask's Peak within the whole continent. And basically, the dwarves just built an entire fortress kingdom in this mountain and control it. So
Okay.
basically, anywhere the mountain reaches is their territory. My dwarves are absolutely unashamedly almost exact copies of Warhammer Fantasy dwarves. They've got the grudges and everything, and they're all about their beards, and they're very grouchy, and I love them, so I took them.
I'm not even sure if that's Warhammer Fantasy or just like general pop culture. So I could easily
Okay,
say
maybe,
that's
yeah, that's
Tolkien. I
fair.
could say that's also
Uh,
the ElfQuest version of dwarves.
I'm just recreating
No,
ElfQuest. Oh no.
I'm joking. Actually, no, they're not actually that similar there.
No,
Um,
I know.
but yeah, the Tolkien representation of dwarves is a lot like that. Even having like this sort of big mountain in the middle of the continent, like Lonely Mountain is within The Hobbit.
Yeah, I meant more specifically like their whole grudge system. They're very honor bound. They even have books that is called grudge books that they carry around. That anytime you like agreed them, they write your name down, and then they'll hate you forever until you make it right by them and stuff like that.
Wow.
Which is very stolen directly from Warhammer. I'm sure it's done elsewhere also, but
I don't think I knew that part about the Warhammer dwarves. That's cool.
yeah, I like it. It's very. They even have like a race wide, like if the goblins came and sacked a dwarven town, then they go in the Book of Grudges, and until the dwarves go and kill that entire warband of goblins, then all of the dwarves have to hear all the other dwarves complain about it until it's done.
All right, so this is more of a traditional representation, so I don't have a lot of like metaphysical questions to get into here.
Yeah.
I do have a topography question at this point, though, about your world, where it doesn't seem like
Okay.
I'm looking at the map, and it's a continent that is sort of a kind of a straight stick, but there's bumps and ridges. But we have ice up in the north, and then we have Vormskir, which we talked about,
Hmm.
Ellenway along the western coast, Bolgo in the middle, and then the other three realms that we haven't gotten to yet. And then down south, there's a mountain range that sort of cuts it off from whatever's down there. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter. But there's no mountain range running along the continent, which is unusual. It indicates that this is a continent that is
Hmm.
moving south and hitting one that's further south and creating that mountain range down there, which is unusual from my understanding of worlds, because typically continents are pushed away from when they get to the poles, they kind of stay there, and it's hard for the tectonic plates to move away from a pole. So that's why Antarctica has been there a long time since it got kicked off from Pangea.
Makes sense.
Where am I going with this? Have you considered this dynamic at all? I guess is where I'm going with it.
So not so much. I do have reasons for why the mountain range in Bolgo is kind of isolated from the rest. And that has to do with
Mhm.
the Age of Dragons, which is basically when the dragons that are now considered gods were kind of ruling over all of civilization because they punished all the civilized
Yeah,
races for hunting all the dragons, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit. But essentially, the dragons took over, put every single civilization into like the Dark Ages, and said, "You're gonna stop this. We're gonna rule over you." And that's kind of when the ice dragon Karask, he created the mountains of that where Bolgo now resides out of ice, and then they just kind of over time ended up becoming the more traditional like stone and ore and everything mountains through
yeah, fair.
magical dragonness. So there's a little bit of hand waviness there. As for the mountain range to the south, I did not have any kind of topographical considerations towards that when I created it. It was more to just not make this weird island continent. And also, that mountain range is where the original campaign was going through to explore the lands down south, the unexplored. So it was much more from a storytelling perspective why it was created rather
Uh-huh.
than a topographical one. Something I should probably put more consideration into. Not because I have to, but because now I am interested in doing that.
Yeah, if you're interested. One possible explanation would be there's some weird orbiting thing going on here for how the planet is spinning compared to how it's oriented towards the sun. If that's even how you want to present like cosmology within this world. Like my own campaign world, the world is flat and the sun and stars are like constellations that were made by the gods, and they're not like real things like we consider them within Earth.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a cool take on it.
Yeah, so like you don't even have to have a real answer, because magic, who cares? Um, like the Forgotten Realms doesn't try to have realistic geography for how stuff is set up there. Pathfinder does for a different big example. Like a lot of the ideas there make sense where typically mountain ranges end up blocking rainfall, and then you'll have a heavy forested region on one side with rain coming in from the ocean and getting blocked by the mountains. And on the other side, there's a desert because the mountains are preventing rainfall from getting to that region.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of have that here because you have the heavy, yeah.
I did try to do that between Rykor and Skaria. Rykor it has a lot of marshlands through it, and then Skaria being mostly desert because of Polko.
Yeah, I can see that here.
I did try to do that a little bit.
It's just the west to east mountain range. I mean, there are a few, but it's like India and China. That's the big one that I'm aware of. Or Africa and Europe also create one.
The map is definitely a result of the limitations of my own geographical, like not just creativity, but definitely creativity, but also like knowledge too. It's very I think one of my players originally called it the Pop-Tart of Doom because it's very square. And it looks like it's frosted in places with the various
I'll tell you right now, I don't think anybody buys an RPG book or plays an RPG campaign because, ooh, this topography of your map is really interesting and well researched. I like it.
I don't know. I would definitely argue that there are some adventures that are run because, oh man, that map looks cool. Like that has definitely happened.
You have to go pretty far into the like, and this place looks like a skull kind of stuff for that to really grab someone that way.
Okay, fair. That's
all right. Let's keep going. We got Bolgo. How about Skaria?
Skaria is kind of boring because I haven't spent a ton of time really fleshing them out super well. Basically, what I've got of Skaria is it's got the huge desert going through it, and it's majority of it is dominated by this desert. Some key notes to it are that it is very merchant based. It's got the biggest like merchant population of trade and everything that goes through it. It's because they don't really have a whole lot of their own natural resources. They rely on kind of directing other realms as resources through them and then kind of taking a cut off the top and sending it to the other realms. Like the trade between Telmath and Bolgo don't go to those two realms. They go through Skaria and whatnot. Skaria really benefits from those things. And Skaria is also the home to the Silvered Order, which is an order of paladins that are like oathed to one of the dragon gods, and they're basically the world police. Like they go around upholding all the justice and everything. So those are kind of the two biggest things that Skaria has to offer.
Yeah, I looked at it and my thought was this must be Egypt. It's a river going through the desert.
Yeah.
But I guess the trade aspect, not something that Egypt was historically known for because the Mediterranean provided a trade route around it. So maybe more like one of the Silk Road countries.
Yeah, I would definitely describe it more towards that. But definitely very Egyptian, like culturally themed, like inspired.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And the Paladin Order sounds interesting as well, but let's save the dragon stuff for later because that's its own thing. All right, yeah. Telmath next. So this is your good. Techno wizard area?
No, that's actually Rykor. Telmath is they're mostly farmlands. They've got a lot of the rolling hills, the low kind of very fertile valley type thing, even though there's not mountains. But
serves me right for trying to guess based off the name what it was. Telmath, these have to be the nerds.
Fair. But Telmath is where the majority of the manlings, which are my version of like halflings, the hobbits, like that, they're the dominant kind of population there, that between them and humans. And it's mostly just kind of like rural farmlands. They've got huge. That's what all these squares on the map are. I don't. They're just really poorly
Okay.
drawn, large like farmlands. Like they have like huge plantations. Like we're talking like thousands of acres type plantations where hundreds of thousands of people work on and stuff like that. And they're very community driven. They're spread out in various villages. They only have one major city, but even that city is pretty much just a bunch of villages that were
Mhm.
formed close enough that they are connected, if that makes sense. And yeah, they're just kind of dotted through all throughout the land and whatnot. It's just a big
And
farming.
you said they're called manlings?
Yeah, manly. So each of the halfling races that I have all tie their ancestry to a single people called the Soonkin, which is the round people. And all of the various current iterations of the halflings, which include manlings, gnomes, dwarves, kobolds, they all are a result of the interbreeding between the Soonkin and the other races. Like manlings are humans and Soonkin, gnomes are elves and Soonkin, dwarves are I don't actually remember off the top of my
All
head.
right.
I'll have to revisit that. I think they're rocks in Soonkin.
Okay. All right. All right.
They're kind of these like mixed races of like an ancient race that has kind of been replaced by all of these sub races with the existing current.
Okay. So that's Telmath. A bit of a different take on halflings than usual because halflings are typically don't have a nation of their own within a lot of RPG creations. They're more like sort of live around humans but don't have their own space.
Yeah, that's kind of originally what I was going with, but I was also struggling with really the identity I wanted to take with the halflings or the manlings is like you've got like the D&D 5th edition halflings, which are all they're the very much so the Bilbo Baggins
Hmm.
halfling or hobbit, where they're burglar, they're the small, spry, can hide easily type of thing. And then you have the Hobbit from Tolkien, which a lot of them are kind of more kind of burly, pudgy, really down to earth, don't really like to do a whole lot of things other than party and garden kind of thing. And I was really struggling with the identity of what I wanted mine to be, whether I wanted to lean into one side or the other, and kind of ended up just kind of going the direction of being neither, where they're more just like humans but
Hmm.
smaller, so
Yeah.
they're just like humans with a different culture almost.
Well, I wouldn't say that's that different for halflings within Tolkien's conception. They're basically just Welsh, but small.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I didn't know the Welsh specific tie-in,
Yeah.
but it
But
does make sense. They're not that far from.
oversimplification, but yeah, they're not. They're just people. Like, all
Yeah,
right, last one, Rykor.
Rykor. Rykor's the home of the most recent campaign we were running. We just ran. I say just, but it was a little over a year ago that we stopped that one. They were starting up a rebellion against an increasingly authoritarian government that was basically trying to push the country into this realm of technological advancement through use of magic by making like magitech stuff, basically using dragon parts to then have mundane things have magical effects, like that
Okay,
tasers
that's
or
cool. That's
like flare guns, stuff like that. So it was like this weird, almost like steampunk type technology, but not quite to that degree level of area. So Rykor is the most technologically out of all the groups. They're also the realm that is the democratically elected president and their whole shtick is like, we're going to be really smart. Like they're the place with all the various colleges and places of learning and like trade schools and stuff like that, where people from across all the other realms come to learn in Rykor from the various masters there, and then take that information and disperse it throughout the world. Because they all come here, they bring their own information, their own cultures and stuff. That means Rykor has become the most diverse and has the most widely varied population.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So that's the 6 nations. All right. Or the 6 realms. I gotta use the 6 realms. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about dragons. From your survey, it seems like dragons sort of replace gods somewhat within your setting. Is that a fair statement?
Kind of. So some dragon place the gods. Essentially, I don't necessarily have like full on deities that are like a part of everybody's life. Instead, basically the existing gods, as they're called in world, are only gods because they're so like powerful in terms of their magical ability, because all dragons are magic, that people just started worshiping them as gods. They're not so much that they actually like, one Zacerth is called the god of death, even though he doesn't really have any control over the realm of death or anything like people believe he does. But like these beliefs and stuff kind of have forged this kind of
Okay.
identity into
Yeah.
this being, if that makes sense. The setting is designed to be very low magic, and that's kind of why these dragons became gods in the eyes of the general public, because a dragon can breathe fire or spew a bunch of acid and stuff, and that's crazy, unheard of. Like, what can do that? There's no natural beast that can do that, so obviously it's a god sort of thing. And my dragons they're not so much like you would find in 5th edition, where they are, I don't even know how to explain it, but like in 5th edition you have dragons that can like shapeshift and act as people and stuff like that, and they're very highly intelligent, and I would argue like civilized in nature. Whereas the dragons in Skjaald are very much more like bestial. Like they are creatures themselves, so they don't quite have the same level of intellect. I don't want to say that, because as they age, they get smarter and smarter and whatnot, but they just don't have the same way they look at the world, if that makes sense. Where they're not scheming or doing all this other stuff. They're just being them. And even though they can interact with the people in quote unquote understandable and civilized ways, they don't they don't have their own civilization. They're not a part of the various peoples of
Yeah.
like
And I
Driktsuung.
think that's a good way of putting it. They're not really a part of civilization. Religion very much is like almost
Yeah.
comprises civilization in a lot of ancient cultures. And yeah, if they're not a part of it, then they're just sort of more like a force of nature.
Yeah, that's actually the perfect way to put it. Dragons are despite being kind of supernatural, they are a force of nature in of themselves.
Okay, so you said there was like this connection between dragons and magic and life in general. And there's like a sort of history to your world that connects to that. So why don't you tell that story?
All right. So dragons themselves are the highest concentration of magic. Like their bodies and their being is where magic manifests the most, which has resulted in kind of every part of them being so magical that it is actually like harnessable. So if you were to kill a dragon and then shear off its scales and then take those scales elsewhere, you could, in theory, if you know how to do it, use those scales to produce magical effect, such as like putting them at the bottom of a cooking pot and having an ever heated cooking pot that is just
Hmm.
always warm, that you never have to light a fire under, something like that. Like So like dragons just emanate magic because they are where magic has manifested the strongest. However, they are not, despite being the strongest source of magic, they are not the only source of magic. Magic is in the very core of what I refer to as the essence of life. There is no life without magic because magic makes life what it is. It basically makes up our souls. And so, because of this hyper manifestation of magical energy within dragons and people's discovery of that, naturally an arms race occurred where the various realms or nations or whatever they were at that given time decided, okay, we need to make sure we get as much of this as we can so nobody else gets it. And so a great hunt of dragons started happening and occurred to the point to where dragons almost became extinct. As a result of all of this genocide of dragons, the manifestation of magic was losing its connection to the world, and so the entire world started to slowly die. Plants started withering before winter came and started to grow back much later into spring than they were before. Over a couple of years, this got worse and worse, and people started to feel more and more sick and less vibrant, and the whole world as a whole, as more and more of these dragons died, were just slowly dying because the magic
Right.
was losing its connection to living things. So that led to some people recognizing this and then deciding to stand up for the dragons and trying to basically get people. It's almost like you can tie it into like the people who stood up for the whales against the whalers in our own world type of thing. And that kind of devolved into a lot of extra conflict where there was a lot of accusations of, oh, you just want us to stop hunting dragons so you can hunt them and you can have all the power, and all the various turmoil politically, which evolved into or devolved into a giant war between all these varying defenders and hunters of dragons. Eventually, it got so bad that the dragons themselves ended up having to get involved, and the oldest and most powerful dragons, who eventually became known as the dragon gods, actually had to band together, and they created the dragonborn race of people by taking the people defending the dragon, and actually physically changing them with magical power into dragon-like humanoids, which are now the dragon.
Oh, okay.
The war raged on for a while until the dragons and their newly formed army, with all their magical powers, eventually basically put everybody into the Dark Ages and killed, almost everybody, breaking people down into small villages, and then they took roost in various parts of the world to basically watch over them, make sure that dragons could make a comeback and kind of regrow their population. Once the population of dragons kind of returned to a stabilized state, the dragon gods, as they're referred to, all just disappeared. They all just left, and nobody knows where they went. And then that was centuries ago. Now a bunch of time has gone by, and civilization has kind of returned to where the six realms are back up and bustling and good, and everybody remembers the age of dragons, is what it's referred to, where they were all hiding under rocks and trying not to piss off their overlords. But there's a little bit of that fear and that reverence has kind of started to slip away, and we're starting to get back into a realm of like, oh well, we're big and strong. Like, there's no way we could be put into another dark age sort of thing.
Okay. So the the Super EPA Act got passed, and the Dragonborn came around and recovered this extinct species so that the magical ecosystem could recover. And now it feels like dragons, if they
Yeah.
wanted to, could sort of hold this over people's head. Like, if you kill me, there'll be a curse put upon your land because that's how my biology works.
Yeah, yeah, there absolutely is that aspect to it. Granted, only like the very very old dragons are able to like grasp it at that level. Most of them are just kind of, like I said, your natural beasts. They're just living their life. Like they see there's people, those are a threat because they've got weapons, but they're also kind of tasty, so
Of
that sort of
course.
thing.
Okay. And in your survey, you also mentioned the spell plague being this thing connected to magic. Does that tie into the dragons at all?
It does in the respect that the magic that is wielded by the various like civilized people is inherently draconic. Like they can only cast spells and do magical things by using draconic materials. So it's tied to dragons in that respect, but it's not so much tied to like living dragons
Okay.
themselves.
I didn't think it was from your description, but I just wanted to double check.
Good question.
Well, yeah, let's talk about the spell plague. Yeah, I'm curious.
The spell plague itself is the way I kind of frame it in my mind is I think of it kind of like radiation. Like we have the ability to do like nuclear reactors and nuclear bombs and stuff like that, but like to harness that level of power and whatnot, there's like a byproduct to that. There's the radiation of it. And so that's what the spell plague is it's just symptoms of being exposed to that magical energy manifesting itself like within your body. So like the spell plague can manifest in ways of like it just mutates you into slowly into like something else. Like that's how some of the hybrid races that aren't quite explained in any of the like playable resources or anything are yet. But
Yeah, like owlbears are a big one.
yeah, um, and like griffins and stuff like that. So like that's where a lot of your like monstrous creatures come from. It's like it's resulting like effects of the spell plague on what would otherwise be natural things.
And does it affect things randomly, or is it more like a wizard cast a spell on an eagle and a horse, and then they touched each other and combined through some thing to make a griffin?
It's a little bit of both. So there's a lot of chaos to it, to where it just kind of uh, does whatever it's going to do. But there's also like science behind it. Like you can study its effects and whatnot, and you can kind of do certain things to guide it to do certain effects that you want to do. So if you wanted to create a griffin, you you absolutely could study that and have that and come up with that effect. But it's not something that you can quite just cast specific spells on, if that makes sense.
It's a diplomatic answer for it works the way the DM wants it to work.
That's a fair point. Yes, that that is certainly how it could be used. Yeah.
But
The plan is to have it a little bit more structured so that you know a little bit more of the front end, but like lore wise, it is very much so like nobody knows what this is except for the mad wizard who's been spending 6 years chewing on dragon scales.
well, we got to go talk to him. That's the quest.
That's gonna be a fun quest.
And this isn't connected to the fourth edition presentation of Spell Plague. It's just the same name.
Yeah, it just happens to be the same name. I am not particularly familiar with Force. I know a couple of things about it, but I'd never played it, and I haven't
Okay.
read too much of it. So I'm sure through osmosis, I probably picked up some of it, and some of the aspects of the spell plague are probably reminiscent of it for sure. But
I would honestly say no. Like
okay,
there are certainly similarities in that they're both magical things that affect people in, somewhat negative ways, but I mean, that's just how you came upon the name, right? Like,
yeah, it was one of those things where it just kind of spell plague kind of just rolls off the tongue and sounds nice. I've also toyed around with like Plague of Scales or Scale Blight stuff like that as potential names, and like also in universe, some people refer to it as those names. But spell plague was just kind of, it gets the point across to people who like just read the name. They kind of, oh, okay, this is magical sickness kind of thing, and also just sounds nice.
Right. Yeah. So does it, for spellcasters, does it mean they're sort of transforming into dragons over time?
It does, yes. I have a whole like list of maladies and effects, and there's a whole I've gone through a couple renditions of how my magic system works because I haven't quite found where it makes me happy, so it's still work in progress. But in previous campaigns, there have been like every time you cast a spell, you're basically gaining this resource of magical radiation that once you hit certain thresholds, things happen to your body. So characters were losing their hair, and in place of like their some patches of their skin, they were getting scales and like various things.
Have you looked at any of the Star Wars systems for how like dark side corruption is handled?
I have not, but I think now that I should.
Yeah, that it's sounding a bit similar to that. It had, and your system actually sounds more complex than that, where there's like thresholds, and then you have to like you start losing points to your stats because the dark side is like physically corrupting you. Like, do you remember that scene in Revenge of the Sith where Palpatine uses his electricity hands and then like his skin like wrinkles as he's doing it?
Yeah, he gets all the wrinkles. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the dark side does to people in Star Wars. It like physically warps their body if they use it too much.
Do you have any particular system to recommend where I start?
Ooh, for that specifically, I know the Dark Side sourcebook for D20 Star Wars had a lot of stats on that, but I also know that that system, I feel like it didn't do enough to discourage Dark Side usage. Like it was very easy for characters to just become completely corrupt because that was where power resides, and
Gotcha.
the consequences were very far removed from it. Um,
Gotcha.
and I'm not familiar with the new Star Wars stuff that I have been told is a lot better, um, but tends to not focus on Force users as much as the old editions.
Interesting. That's certainly one aspect that I want to make sure I get right with my magic system is I want it to be, because it's a low magic setting, I want magic to be properly powerful without being like abusably so, because I really want to almost de-incentivize players from having multiple spellcasters in a party, or even I would even prefer it that not every party has a spellcaster in it, like that it's every like 2 or 3 parties has a single spellcaster kind of thing, just because that's kind of the feel and the setting wide thing I want for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely want there to be like consequences to using the power through the spell plague, but I also am limiting it in ways of just availability, in that instead of like regainable spell slots like D&D 5th edition uses, I actually tie my magic usage to the draconic materials that you can acquire, which means you actually have to acquire those even in game, whether that's you go to a town where there's a dragon butcher in it who can buy you some, or you have to go hunt a dragon yourself and do the harvesting. Like, it's not super readily available for you to have what you need to cast your spells, so you really have to pick and choose when you cast and what you cast.
And going back to the Star Wars example, like in the D20 Star Wars, like you could start as a Jedi, but the rules suggested that nobody start as a Jedi. Like no one can start as a Force user, and you have to
Gotcha.
like grow into it as a character.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like kind of what I would like to do. I want it to be available for players who want to go that route, but I'm putting a lot of like warnings and stuff in the information of like this genuinely is a risk. Like, you are probably not going to be as powerful or as effective as most of your party for 80% of the time, but the 20% that you are going to blow them out of the water like they've never seen before.
Yeah, and I think that's the conception for D&D in some people's mind as well, where, wizards deal more damage, but they need the protection of fighters to be able to do that.
And it's different settings too. With D&D, especially in Forgotten Realms, if you're playing Forgotten Realms,
Yeah.
it's a high magic system. They just use cantrips on the daily sort of thing. So magic is just an integrated part in how their whole universe works. Whereas I'm really trying to avoid that. I want, even if all you do is walk through a town and like Gandalf lights his staff to light up the whole area of Moria, like that should be like, people should look at that like, oh wow, that's what.
Yeah, and it does feel like in D&D, like maybe you're not explicitly doing this, but it feels like a world where, yeah, a wizard is casting 3 spells to make his breakfast every morning.
Yeah, which is perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's not quite the setting that I want. Because I personally have a great dislike for the response to something being, oh, it's just magic sort of thing. Like, I will die on the hill that I think Harry Potter is a terrible series. I hate it. It's a series for babies because all it does is hand wave and say, oh, this is possible because magic, duh. And I understand people like it. There's nothing wrong with that, but I hate it.
There was a breakdown of Harry Potter that I read that was talking about that, where Harry Potter is a world that seems to have rules for stuff, right? Like you need to cast a spell this way, and the characters when they're first going to school make mistakes with the spells and turn into like pigs or something.
Yeah.
When you do something wrong with the spell, it doesn't do anything close to what you were intending to do. But then there's also this aspect of, when Harry wanted to make the window disappear at the snake enclosure so that the snake would
It just happened.
Yeah, it just happened. Like he didn't
Yeah.
need to cast a spell. He just wished it happened and it happened. So there's seems to be there's rules for how magic works, but also there are no rules for how magic works.
Or in the later books when they're throwing all these deadly spells around and all they're doing is waving their wands around. They're not having to do any of the incantations or anything like that. It just, yeah, it's an absolute it's a mess. I can't stand it.
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from for that.
My magic system needs to be, it's silly to say something like my magic system needs to be grounded in reality, but like that's kind of the approach that I'm trying to take with these. Like, I want players to be able to understand how magic works so that they can utilize it in ways that are extreme and awesome.
So one of the things I got from the way you filled out your survey that connects to this is that you seem to be trying to build a world and a system as well, since we're getting into that, where there are like heavy consequences for stuff. And part of that for the setting was it also seemed like your setting had a lot of really dark influences that we haven't talked a lot about yet. Where in general it seemed like the world is in a bad place and there's a lot of negative things, and there's this like sort of dark age going on at the moment. Does that seem like a fair statement for where the world is right now?
Yeah, I would definitely put it that way. It's definitely, I would like to portray both the setting and the game in the like system in a way that survival doesn't feel like it's a given. Like you're not just going to go on the day to day and just live your life. That's not just going to happen. You have to every single day you're going to have to earn that survival in some way. Whether that's you have to go procure your own food by hunting or foraging, and like while you're out there foraging, the wilderness is not tame. Like it, if you kind of mirror that to the real world, where there's kind of a limitation to how big and scary and awful the creatures in our world were and are,
Right.
to where we were able to kind of just make mundane tools and kind of rise up to the top of the food chain fairly quickly. I know I'm oversimplifying it, obviously, but now if you were to take that progress of going to the top of the food chain and throw in things like owlbears and dragons and like just these not natural creatures to our world, that would make that progress of getting to the top of that food chain much more difficult and take way longer. And that's kind of the approach I'm taking with it is the wilderness is not necessarily any more hostile than it was with humans kind of growing up, for lack of a better term. The difference is that just the threats are just that much more threatening.
I think another thing that isn't true for your world when I think about that is that our conception of humans is that they don't have a lot of competitors for the like intelligent animal space compared to fantasy worlds where you have elves, dwarves, and dragons are intelligent within your world and in most D&D worlds, and the Zunkin and goblins and orcs and all these other things that are quite different. And you could see some sort of war of extinction, like the separate Homo species in the distant past for Earth during the evolution of humans occurring and making it difficult for there to be a winning race, I guess.
Yeah, that's a fair way to put it. Sure. It puts a different. It's just different variables.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but part of what I was looking at is that I feel like there's a tendency to look at the standard setting for D&D where there's like, paladins and justice and then evil orcs and evil goblins, and then people look at that and then look at the real world and want to create something that's more of a like Shades of Grey thing where like maybe the paladins are corrupt and maybe the goblins are not so bad and everything is sort of this, Shades of Grey. And your setting from the survey seemed more like everything's bad.
Okay, yeah, that definitely. So that kind of alludes to my Warhammer 40K, the real grim dark type
Mm-hmm.
inspirations of you could definitely call it like a pessimistic view on things of like instead of shades of gray, it's my take is definitely more shades of black. Like how it's not whether or not someone is bad, it's how bad are they willing to be in order to serve their own case. I think that's a kind of a byproduct of how kind of deadly and hostile I'm trying to portray just the baseline of life. Like if you are a person who potentially has to face down 2 or 3 wolves to scrape some meat off of a carcass that they took down in order for you and your family to survive, then you're willing to go to more lengths of morally not upstanding things to ensure that survival. So if like you see somebody else carrying 3 armloads of bread to their family, you're much more likely to go push them down, take some or all of their bread to feed your starving family.
Right.
That makes sense. So there definitely is a lot of bad begets worse within the setting and all those darker tones. And what I would like to happen is that the goodness of the world comes from the players. Like the players are the ones that inject that hope. Like they're the ones that carry the okay, we've got to be better than this kind of thing. And part of what the setting's trying to do is test that. Like almost like we'll take it back to Star Wars. Luke has to completely like forego his desire to strike down the Emperor because that's the right thing to do, and striking down the Emperor, attempting to do so, would actually make the Emperor win, even though that's what he wants to do and might possibly be the safest thing for him to do. Like he's in danger, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I can definitely see that. So within your system, how are you incentivizing players to be heroic compared to being, sort of a conniving bastard that takes advantage of people?
That's a really good question. I don't think in its current state I really have much that really incentivizes. I think the closest thing would just be that being a conniving bastard comes with its own risks, and when you are not good to somebody else, then you're making a bigger enemy out of something that you might not necessarily want to spend your time defending yourself against, if that makes sense. Like, if you're going to go steal that person's bread, now what are they going to do in response, or what is their family going to do in response if you kill them in the process? Like, now you have to worry about that instead of just worrying about, how am I going to deal with those wolves tomorrow, to family tomorrow, sort of thing. So there's that sort of kind of intrinsic punishment to doing bad things, is adding more to your plate to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's also sort of going to be there anyways, because even if you're good to the person with the bread, doesn't mean that they're not going to go steal from you or whatever behind your back. So, like, I don't know. That's something that I will probably need to visit at some point and make a little bit more set in stone.
Yeah, like maybe some sort of reputation system might work for that. Because I'm just thinking, like, there's this concept within evolution where how do you explain altruism? Like, how does altruism evolve within a species? Because it would make sense for a individual to be selfish and keep more for itself, because then it has more resources and is more likely to reproduce within the evolution survival of the fittest concept.
Yeah.
And altruism comes about because it makes it more likely that a larger unit will reproduce. Like, altruism is good not for the individual, but good for the village as a whole.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And you can bring math into it for some evolution classes, but the point being that in a lot of cases, within selfish societies, it can be easier to be selfish because there aren't any real consequences for it. So if a player is able to rip someone off, and the social society has people get ripped off all the time, then how can you justify social consequences for the players when there aren't social consequences for Joe NPC that did the same thing to them 3 sessions ago?
Yeah, that's definitely something fair to bring up for sure. I think the idea is that, like, there's an underlying attempt within these societies to have those social consequences, but like the scale of the hardship kind of overwhelms it in the most part. So, like, the idea of stealing being bad and is technically punishable is still there, but just like it's known that not every and potentially even most thieves aren't necessarily going to get caught and punished, because there's worse things to happen. But that doesn't necessarily solve what you were asking. Like, because then if the players are punished, it feels bad, because what about all these other thieves? Why are we the ones that were caught? Like, you're just punishing us and we're being targeted, kind of thing. So there's definitely some play there that needs to be figured out.
Well, and part of the issue that I'm thinking of here is that, like, people like games like Grand Theft Auto for video games, where I get to break all these rules and mess everything up and be like an agent of chaos within this fictional society. And players can often approach role-playing games that same way, where they want to be a little chaos goblin running around breaking everything.
Or the stereotypical murder hobos.
Right, exactly, yes. And your setting seems like it encourages that, like, not necessarily in a negative way, but where the players, from what my reading of it, it seemed like that it's very much like an old school Renaissance style, where the players are looking out for ways to take advantage of situations, not necessarily like of people, but that mindset can then bleed into take advantage of social situations within the game as well.
Mm-hmm. I could see that.
And I know the system is still in development, so maybe you don't have an answer for that yet, which is perfectly acceptable. I just thought I might bring it up
Yeah.
if you did have an
No,
idea.
I 100% appreciate the bringing it up in the conversation around it, because it's definitely things like that are definitely things that I need to be considering. I don't currently have an answer for that, but it is something that I do agree needs to be addressed in some way, shape, or form. I think instinctively how I would react to it and how I would address it would be more through like GM guidance, if that makes sense. Like offering different ways that the GM can run things and whatnot, and not so much like hard set system like mechanics and rules and stuff.
Well, like an easy way to incentivize it is that just like players only get experience for honorable deeds.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Players are going to follow their reward system typically.
Hmm.
So if the reward system is if I get more gold, then I am more powerful, players will tend to do that. If the reward system
Yeah.
is if I perform honorable acts and improve society, then that's what they'll do.
Okay.
So that might be the way to do it. Yes, DM guidance is good, but players need guidance as well. And
Oh, that's fair.
yeah,
Yeah.
the reward system is typically how that's orchestrated. Well, I was trying to bleed easily from like talking the setting to talking about the system, and we got into this part that you don't have answers on yet, which is fine.
I'm sorry.
You don't be sorry. You should definitely have like the core mechanics of the game worked out and fun before you start worrying about like how do I encourage play styles that I want to encourage.
Right, right. So I just mean I'm sorry I ruined your awesome segue.
uh, well, yeah. So we talked about the Skjaald setting. Let's talk about the Skjaald system. So the Skjaald Sagas. So it started off as D&D 5e homebrew stuff and has spun off. At what point did you feel like it had to be something separate?
Oh boy, it actually wasn't that long ago. It was probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, is when I officially made the jump. We played, I want to say, 4 campaigns using fifth edition as the foundation and just homebrewing it. And each campaign we played just became progressively more and more homebrewed. Like the last 2 campaigns that we played using fifth edition were using like complete homebrew overhaul systems. Forget the exact name of it, but we were using like the darkest dungeon homebrew
Oh,
or darker dungeon or something like that, where they start adding in like the temperature and the fatigue and the hunger conditions and stuff like that,
okay.
and various other mechanics that made a like ov- over time attrition throughout an adventure happen, to kind of start adding more to that like survival kind of darker aspect that I was looking for my setting. And I just kept running into issues of not really being super tied into the identity of the game I was running, with what kind of story I was trying to tell with these campaigns, and that kind of led to this kind of dissonance as I was running it, as it just something was off with it.
Okay. What do you mean by identity there?
So I was using a bunch of stuff that was, and by stuff I mean like all these different homebrew mechanics and rules and whatnot that I was picking up from various sources
Hmm.
to try and portray the type of story I was trying to tell through the system, but it wasn't quite hitting the mark, if that makes sense. Like it was closer than fifth edition was, but it wasn't quite what I wanted.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that if you were doing like Darkest Dungeon stuff, which does not sound that similar to how you have described Skjaald Sagas here.
Yeah, so it wasn't like Darkest Dungeon, like the turn-based game. It was it's a similar name to that, which is why I always forget what it is. But it just adds a bunch of different concepts to fifth edition.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it just at some point during each of the campaigns ended up feeling like I wasn't telling quite the story that I wanted to be telling, and it was the story I was telling wasn't mine. So like there was that weird like dissonance, like I was saying, and disconnect from this game that I was running. And that came with a bunch of this like imposter syndrome stuff, like am I actually doing a good job, even though my players were doing a really good job of like giving me really good feedback and like being super supportive and whatnot. There was just in the back of my mind there was always just this like this isn't right. And so that's why it just kept getting increasingly more and more homebrew as the campaigns went on, just because I was trying to find that piece. And then eventually, as we kept doing that homebrew, I was adding in little bits of just specific mechanics that I was introducing myself instead of just adapting from somebody else's homebrew, and they were being received quite well. And so that started making my confidence grow and more until eventually I was like, okay, I'm not telling the story I want to be telling here through the system, and the things I'm designing are being received just as well, if not sometimes a little bit better than the homebrew that I'm adapting. I think it's just time that I tell the story I want to tell, and the only way I can do that is by doing it through my own system. Like I have to make this move. I have to quit trying to bend fifth edition into all these different shapes to try and fit my mold, and I just need to make my own mold. And that's how it happened.
Yeah, there's that joke on RPG design on Reddit where D&D is like the second best system for everything.
100%. Like I 100% would not be designing my own system right now if I had not started with D&D 5th edition. Like D&D 5th edition is the greatest not greatest game ever. If that makes sense. Almost exactly what you just said. Like it is the greatest game to get you to the game you should be playing. The best gateway drug ever.
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna say it's your introductory drug. Okay, so it built out from all this homebrew. So is Skjaald Sagas still a D20 system, or is it morphed into something else at this point?
It is at its core, it's a D20 system. It has a bunch of different pieces kind of attached to it. Like I have various subsystems that use like step dice. I have subsystems that use resource dice that just use like a spin down die. And I took kind of the Pathfinder-ish route. I don't necessarily like strictly saying that I went the same way as Pathfinder, but of like big modifiers, lots of granularity and variance and whatnot. But at its very core, the more important pieces of it are still D20. Yeah.
I would actually say that's more of a traditional route, and that D&D 5th edition is a exception to how games are usually designed with very small modifiers.
Oh, okay.
Or other games that don't really have progression at all for characters to have bigger numbers. Like, D&D starts with like proficiency bonus 2 and goes up to 7 or 6, I forget.
Yeah.
Whereas other ones, Tales from Elsewhere, that we on the same Discord server for, there's no progression at all. You have your character, that's it.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very linear.
Yeah, very, very flat.
Or not linear. What is it? Horizontal?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, like you progress into other areas kind of, but you're still limited and you
Yeah.
can't get too far away from your character's focus. Yeah. So I think that 5th edition is actually very different from a lot of other games. Other games are either flat or number gets bigger all the time, and 5th edition was this realm in between where there's very, very slow progression of numbers.
That's probably why it ended up being such a good gateway drug. Is like it has the simplicity, but also it's not too simple. Like, I know there's a lot of people out there that really hate it when people refer to fifth edition as a simple game.
I it's not a simple game, but it is a game that is easy to understand what you're supposed to do, I think,
Yes.
because it's simulationist, and if you have a DM that understands the rules, they can tell you do this during combat and you will figure it out and eventually you'll learn how your character works.
Yeah.
Compared to like Blades in the Dark where, well, what do you want to do? How do you want to deal with this problem? You don't have to just go hit the goblin with the sword. You can do anything you want to get around the goblin. You can even
Right.
flash back in time and poison the goblin's steak he had for dinner. Like there's so many
That's
ways
wild.
to find solutions in Blades in the Dark that it can be paralyzing for people because they don't know how to interact with that level of freedom within a system.
Yeah, that choice paralysis definitely. Well, okay, so it's not. I don't know. So choice paralysis is definitely a thing, but I don't necessarily know that that's what I'm alluding to. It's there. So in my eyes, there's almost two different types of choice paralysis. There's so many options out in front of me, I don't know what to pick between them.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's kind of what we're talking about. At least I think you're talking about. I don't know. I'm not familiar with Shadows in the Dark, but there's the I don't even know what my options are choice paralysis.
Yeah, that's kind
And
of what I meant is that a player who's not familiar with Blades in the Dark won't know about the flashback mechanic where previously you had poisoned the goblin's steak, and that's the goblin is actually
gotcha.
asleep right now because you gave him a sleeping poison. Compared to D&D where your options are my character has a sword, this is how I solve problems. And I know this is how I solve problems, and that makes the game simple. I roll a d20,
True,
I get a
true.
18, I hit, I deal 1d8 plus 3 damage.
But it's not so overbearing that like even though your character that's how you solve problems, there's still that room of trying to solve problems another way if like that's what you want to do. Like there's all the persuasion checks and everything like that. Like there's room, even though I think that's why D&D is really I I can't say too much bad about it, even though I've moved on from it at this point from fifth edition.
Mm-hmm.
It's the reason I'm so into tabletop RPG.
Yeah, I think we're both on the same page about what we mean by simple here. Um, okay, so Skjaald Sagas is still a D20 system.
Mm-hmm.
Is it still a class-based system? Is another question about it.
So yes, it is still a class-based system, but it's not in the sense a class-based system in the way that I'm necessarily familiar with class-based systems. Granted, I don't have a whole lot of knowledge of tabletop RPGs. Most of the information that I'm drawing from is D&D, some of Pathfinder and Pathfinder Second Edition, a little bit of Starfinder, and that's almost it. And then the various video games that I played, which is a different realm, obviously, but still, I draw a lot of my design decisions and stuff like that off of
Yeah, no,
stuff
I
like
think
that.
that's fine.
So instead of like fifth edition, where you pick your class at level 1 and you kind of are that class, unless you're playing with multi-classing, in which case you eventually take another class and you multi-class, but you are those classes for your entire character. The route I decided to go with Skjaald Sagas is we have what are called character archetypes and character callings, where the archetypes are more aligned towards character like personalities. So a couple example archetypes would be like the thinker or uh, the believer, in which these basically are supposed to represent your character in a way that gives you tools to kind of fit that, for lack of a better term, stereotype. Like the thinker gives you tools to help kind of outthink your problem, to think your way around obstacles and solve problems. Whereas the believer is more about like leaning into you could go the religious route where you're believing in a higher power to help you get through your problems, or You're just believing in another member of your party, and so you're supporting them with your belief to get you through your problem. Stuff like that. So your archetypes are built to kind of help one give you the tools for the minute things that you want your character to do, but also be kind of a guide to how to play your character. If that makes sense. In terms of like not just mechanically, but also role playing.
Mhm.
Like if you have several stages in the thinker archetype, then you're going to want to play it more as, I don't know, like a Sherlock Holmes type character. Maybe not quite to that extent, but like along those lines where you're thinking rather than running up and trying to punch people, sort of,
Okay.
or being aggressive. And then, so to get the archetypes, you have to develop them. And developing your archetypes happens during every character level. So when you gain a level, you get an increase in your attributes. And one of those increases to your attribute is directed specifically towards an attribute that you are actively trying to develop. And once you increase enough of those attributes within that archetype, it becomes yours. You become developed. So let's say thinker, you have to increase your comprehension and also one other of your mental attribute. So after 2 character levels, once you have one comprehension increase and one of another mental attribute increase, you now are a stage 1 thinker archetype. And so it's really meant to kind of be this conscious decision that you're making ahead of time so that you can play your character accordingly. Like, okay, I'm trying to kind of develop my character into being more of an aggressive person, so I'm going to start developing the fighter archetype, which means I'm going to start uh, doing physical exercises to increase my bodily withstanding and my strength.
Mhm.
Or I'm going to start trying to rough people up and practice with swordplay or whatever. So like you're taking these steps both in role play, but also as you level up mechanically to develop this archetype to become the character that you're supposed to become.
Okay, so you're leveling up like your skills or your attributes, and that in turn levels up the archetype. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So I could potentially be like a fighter archetype, you said level 3, and a thinker level 1 based off of how I'd put my skills.
Yep. And there are, okay, I can't say there's no limitations because I'm designing some what I'm calling mirror archetypes where they are like the complete opposite of each other. For example, there's the coward archetype is not going to be able to also take the leader archetype because of conflicts unless they have like maybe this other third archetype that overrides or whatever. So like there are some restrictions, but they're going to be very far and few between. The idea is for it to be very open, that you're basically the archetypes, even though they're going to tie into the callings, which I'll get into here in a second, are supposed to just be the very foundation of what your character is. Um, and like I said, be that guide. Like, okay, how should I be playing this? How should I approach these situations? Like those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Because that's the tools that you have as a player are based around those things.
Yeah, to a very small degree. So the archetypes themselves don't really offer a whole lot other than other than that like the stat increases that you're getting from your attributes, and then they'll have some smaller perks that they offer. But the way Skjaald is designed is you're going to be able to do most of the things that you want to do as a character, as any archetype. So you'll be able to take all of the same like attack options with your weapons. You're going to be able to do all the same different movement options. And then where some of the more specific kind of differences come in is the callings, which are going to allow you to do more powerful but very much more specific things. every single character is it's a base character. So you have your base character level, and that's kind of what the archetypes represent, is your base character level. Um, and then eventually, once you get certain archetypes to certain levels, that opens up the ability for you to, what I'm calling is find your calling, basically like your character's purpose in life.
Oh,
So
okay.
if you have two stages of the believer calling, then, or not calling, excuse me, archetype, then the cleric calling opens up to, and so your character could find their calling as a cleric. They are somebody who's supposed to be a believer in others, somebody who like leads their, not necessarily leads their flock, but is a part of some kind of bigger, not necessarily religious, but like congregation sort of thing. Or if you are a character who is more along the physical side, where you take in the fighter or the protector archetypes, that could lead towards finding your calling as a soldier or finding your calling as a warrior, which are basically my version of the fighter and the barbarian from fifth.
I really like that. I've enjoyed systems where it feels like there's this mechanical goal for your character to make it to this big thing that is like a new title for your character. So yeah, having a
Mm-hmm.
calling really satisfies that. I like that a lot.
And then those callings come with your bigger, like the bigger changes in your character. So for example, the soldier calling brings in a whole new mechanic to your character called the martial die, which is all around your use of your weapon fighting. Not necessarily a weapon, because you can do it like barefisted or whatever as well, or if you're a dragonborn, you can bite people. But like it's all about just being alert and being ready, and just that martial prowess that comes with the discipline and the training of being a soldier is all represented your martial die.
Okay. How does all this stuff add up for like, say you're some badass guy that's got really high stats in something, and he wants to go hit a goblin with a sword because I keep coming back to that example. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how does this all add together to hit the goblin with the sword?
So are you asking for how does combat work, or are you just talking about the specific instance of you just want to hit a goblin?
You can do a broader example. I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So the combat system that I'm using is an AP based system where your AP that you generate varies based on your character. It's got a bunch of different variables, from your character's swiftness, which is one of your attributes, to other conditional effects, like maybe you've got a leg up on them and you surprise them, so you get additional AP or whatnot.
Can you? I'm aware of what AP systems are. Can you explain them for the folks at home?
Oh yeah. So AP is short for action points, which is essentially a currency that you use to spend uh, use to spend, redundancy. Anyways, you spend to take actions with your character. These actions can range from movement to attacking to throwing a weapon to your ally to like the possibilities are endless. And this is kind of where there are too many options, so
Right, right.
choice paralysis comes in. Um, but essentially, you generate a certain number of these action points uh, every combat round, and then those action points are actually used as your initiative value. And as you take actions and you spend these action points, your initiative goes down. So, for example, if you're attacking a goblin with a sword, let's say you use 5 action points, and you go, both you and the goblin, you're at 10, the goblin's at 9. You use 5, so you drop down to 5. Now the goblin gets to act because he's at 9 and you're at 5. So then the goblin gets to act until he uses action points to lower him below you, in which case you get to act again.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'd actually talked about this on the Discord server at one point. This is sounding familiar.
Yeah, it's been pretty. difficult for me to kind of track down exactly how it's going to work, and I think it's just going to take some testing to see how how effective it works. But I really like the idea because it has this kind of it's got this back and forth nature, and it really gives you like depth of tactics of what to do. Like you do a bunch of smaller actions so that you can take more actions, or do you do bigger actions to try and prevent others from acting kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah. There was a system called Hackmaster that had really granular like weapon stats, where an attack with like a great sword took 12 actions, but an attack with a
Oh,
dagger took like 4 actions. So there was this idea that like someone with 2 daggers could just really destroy someone with a great sword if they get in close because they're attacking 6 times as much.
gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mine doesn't get quite that granular, which is kind of crazy for me to say because I think my system is it's obviously not the most granular one out there. There are definitely some crazy in-depth systems, but it's up there. I get pretty in-depth with a lot of the variants that I use and options that I offer and whatnot. In my system, there's a series of different action types. There's instant actions, which are 1 action point. There are half actions, which are 2 action points. There are full actions, which are 4 action points. And then there are intricate actions, which are 5 or more actions. And it can be as many as you want or as many as you have,
Mm,
essentially,
gotcha.
for an intricate action. And so, like, whereas you won't quite run into the issue of specifically daggers being better than great swords, you might run into the situation where somebody making you know, 4 half action attacks versus the one person making a single intricate action attack, that the half action attack person might end up just eviscerating the other person before he gets to act. But again, that comes down to the person making the half action attacks has to have the higher initiative in the first place to be able to. It's a little experimental in its way. I actually think that the way I'm doing the action point and initiative system would lean in really, really well into like a Western kind of gunslinging type game, even though that's not the game I'm making. But I just think like shooting and then the initiative going to your opponent who can then either shoot or dodge or whatever, like the back and forth nature of that
Hmm.
is like really reminiscent of that like Wild West shootout type of fight.
Yeah, cool. I'd love to see it in action.
Hopefully it works.
And are your players enjoying it so far?
I haven't been testing it quite yet. I'm trying to. My goal was to get it to playtest ready by the end of the year. Unfortunately, the holidays were a bit more involved than I was expecting, so I've pushed that deadline out to, well, it was to this week, but I'm having to push it back out another couple days. And then I have a lot of work to do on the back end to get the virtual tabletop ready with the character sheet and everything. So,
Okay. Well, it sounds like it's going to be cool.
yeah, I got really inspired. I stumbled my way onto a Discord channel that was a bunch of people talking about game design, which then eventually led me to Peter's Discord, where even more people were talking about design, and they've really helped me a lot get get my nose to the grindstone.
So at the moment, you're still playing like the homebrew fifth edition, and then are you gonna take that same campaign into Skjaald Sagas, or are you gonna start something fresh?
The hope is that I'm going to wrap things up kind of neatly in a little bow and have some resolution for the current characters because the transition into the new system isn't going to be super clean, so it'll be a whole lot better to have fresh characters.
Okay. I think I've gone through all of my questions and stuff for the setting and your system. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
Not really about like this stuff. I think we kind of covered a whole lot of things. There's anything else you want to chat about. Doesn't necessarily have to be about my stuff. What experience do you have in the TTRPG kind of realm? You have a lot of games under your belt, like different games and whatnot. How long have you been playing?
Yeah, I've been playing since I was 9, and I'm 33 now. My group, it's been the same group the whole time as well.
Oh, you haven't played with any other groups, or just
I mean, I have, but like I've like just for a little bit and then gone like I still played
got
with my
you?
main
That
group.
that's the core group. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Uh, so we played a couple different systems, mostly D&D. We've done third, fourth, and fifth edition.
Which is your favorite out of those three?
Oh, out of those, fourth edition.
Fourth edition.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that didn't like fourth edition.
Yeah.
It's
I think that's
it's really
fair.
a love it or hate it edition from what I've heard. I don't really know much about it.
So in the editions, like first, second, and third had a sort of a natural progression feeling to them, and frankly, fifth edition feels like more of a natural progression than fourth edition does. Fourth edition departed really hard from what D&D was previously, so I get why people don't like it.
I've heard it kind of leaned a little bit more into the video gamey side. That like I've heard speculation that there was supposed to be like a virtual tabletop that came with it to
Uh-huh.
help with it, but
Yeah, yeah. I think it was a bit premature for that, but it was only a few years later that Roll20 started taking off.
oh,
Yeah, now it's huge. So yeah, it is a bit more video gamey, but fifth edition is as well. Like third edition didn't have short rests. Fourth edition introduced that concept, but things were specifically called like encounter powers instead of
gotcha.
this ability you can use it again after a short rest. It was called an encounter power,
Right,
and you could use it again after a short rest, but that's just what encounter power meant.
right,
And that has this feeling of like in World of Warcraft where like you have abilities that have their cooldowns and
right,
then you
right.
can use
Yeah,
it again. And at high levels, you end up having like 6 encounter powers and 6 daily powers and 3 at will powers. So you're just looking at all these different buttons to press, and that levels the playing field was kind of the intention, where fighters and wizards both feel good to play at high levels,
hmm
compared to third edition, where in fifth edition somewhat, where fighters don't tend to feel as good at higher levels compared to wizards who can solve any problem with magic, whereas fighters have
right.
big stick, I can hit things.
Yeah,
Um, so fourth edition made it so the classes were more even. There wasn't as much customization as third edition, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Third edition probably had way too much of that.
right.
I mean, it's definitely cut back in fifth edition. Like fifth edition, I think now has like 50 feats that you can take. There was like 50 feats in the initial player's handbook in third edition. Yeah, so it was immense.
I've been looking at a lot of the stuff I'm trying to do, and it's like when you want to offer, it's hard to find that like balance between like, okay, this is like you want to fit this niche thing, but you don't like it doesn't really fit the power scale of some of these other great like general things.
I think Pathfinder did a good job of that for second edition, where there are different like levels of feats, right?
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
the bottom is like skill feats, which are situational and almost useless. And then there's general feats, and then there's ancestry feats, and then there's class feats. And class feats are strong; they do good stuff.
hmm
And ancestry feats are also really good and can be like character defining. And then general feats are kind of like, it's a good bonus.
Right. I didn't know they were broken up like that. Do you earn those at different times
Hmm.
or
Yep, you do.
okay.
You get a feat like every level, but it's not. I don't remember the exact progression, but yes, it's something like a feat every level. But it varies. So I think class feats are every even level, skill feats are every odd level, general feats happen like every 5 levels, and tertiary feats are every 4 levels.
Gotcha.
Something like that.
That makes sense. With Skjaald Sagas, I'm trying to. I've always been a big fan of milestone leveling, so I'm trying to lean a little bit away from the level based progression and advancement. Most of the progression that a character has in Skjaald is actually through downtime choices and whatnot. So if you want to get pick up new skills, or I'm calling them talents, or you want to get better at your sword and whatnot, you don't get that. In fifth edition, your proficiency goes up by level, and there are certain things that you can do to increase your proficiency with your sword through the choices you make when you level up. But the way I'm doing it is you actually do training during your downtime, which then gives you progress towards your next proficiency level with that weapon or that talent or those tools or whatnot. So you actually, what you do during your downtime, in camp and whatnot, actually matters towards your character progression, and you can actually choose where you progress and how quickly you progress and whatnot based on how much time you spend committing towards those things.
Your game is sounding like you would benefit from reading the Hackmaster rules.
Okay.
Because you are doing some things that are very similar to what Hackmaster does.
Oh, really?
And not in a way where it's just like, Todd, just go play Hackmaster. It has everything you want.
Okay.
It does not. It is not the system for you necessarily. But
Okay.
I think reading it will help you come up with ideas as a game designer.
Okay. That's good. I don't have a whole lot of foundation. I've tried to do as much research as I can, but I'm kind of doing the research as I go rather than doing the research and then deciding to make a game. So suggestions like this are super, super helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. Yeah, I think it will definitely be helpful. And the Hackmaster, the full rules are not available for free, but there is a rather large demo that is.
Got you. Okay.
So what I've linked you there is the free rule set, which is 230 pages.
Holy.
Yes.
All right.
And one thing that I wanted to comment on that is not in that rule set is the level up rules.
Okay.
Okay, oversimplification there. There are level up rules in the basic rule set that I sent you. Characters can level up. That, of course they can. It's a class-based system where you level up. But one of the other things that the advanced rules introduced was that you get sort of extra bonuses when you level up. Something cool happens at training camp, a grandmaster stopped by and gave you a seminar. So
okay.
you get a little extra bonus in this skill because the grandmaster was there to teach you it. Or on a training camp in the wilderness, you were attacked by an owl bear, and your character is injured after training camp because you defeated the owl bear. Your character is now stronger, and you get 50 free experience points or something.
Gotcha. Okay. That's cool.
So that kind of thing, that felt really fun and makes leveling up even more interesting than just I finally get my dopamine squirt.
Yeah.
My dopamine
that's
injection.
kind of the basis behind the approach I'm going with the levels and the archetypes and everything. Is there was always something that rubbed me wrong about how when we would be playing a game and we would reach a point where we would level up, and then now all of a sudden these characters can do all these things, and sometimes players will have wanted to kind of pivot their character a little bit, so now all of a sudden, even though they haven't been doing really much role play or anything in character to suggest that this is about to happen, all of a sudden now they have all these new things that they can do, or these new spells, and that always kind of, I was never mad at it, but it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Okay, it would be kind of nice if the system made it to where you kind of gradually went into these things and you kind of were incentivized, or not even necessarily incentivized, but kind of guided into planning ahead like that in a way that is kind of like you can't just at the last second change your mind sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah. D&D originally had training as part of it.
Hmm.
In second edition, you had to train to level up. You had to go to the town and spend some money to go to the
Oh, that's
fighting
right.
dojo or the library to level up.
Which is why gold was so important in the earlier editions, was because gold essentially is how you leveled up, is you spent money to get better.
Yep, yep. That was one of the reasons why it was so useful. That's stayed as a sort of optional rule within D&D, but a lot of things within modern systems don't really work for that. Like some of the Pathfinder adventure paths, for example. One of them is where you're like going over the polar ice cap. There's no villages to trade with. There's no villages to train
Right.
at. And this
Yeah.
is a adventure where you're supposed to go up 2 levels during it. If you're using that system where you have to like go to a place and pay and train, that adventure does not work.
Right.
So Pathfinder, while it has the you can do the training thing, it seems like that is very much not the intention for the system anymore.
Right. And I totally understand the aspect that 5th edition has, where it just kind of gives you stuff as you level up, because like that takes a lot of the like responsibility for the DM to come up with things and stuff. Like I totally understand it. It just never kind of sat right with.
I think it's just more fun as a player to because that's how like how video games work, right? Like you
Yeah.
unlock the chest and you get like the cool thing right away, and then
Yeah.
you can go and use it right away instead of I guess survival horror games are a different version here, where you unlock the chest and then yes, you have to go build the weapon, and you have to find a crafting bench to build the weapon, and you have to have the resources to build the weapon, and now you get the shotgun.
Yeah.
uh,
I guess I that's probably a lot of where some of that comes from in terms of like how I approach some of the things within my game. Is I do like that's probably my most played genre of video games, is like the survival game,
mhm.
like Rust, Ark, those sorts of games.
Well, and I think it fits well for the Western theme you were talking about. Like Red Dead Redemption is kind of a survival game.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. Yeah,
Um, I think it's one where
I
there's
would.
an abundance of resources because you're in the American West, and if you're hungry, just go kill a deer.
But you
Um,
still have to go do it. Yeah,
yeah,
I
you have
think I
to
would
go do it.
agree. I would agree with that.
So I played D&D. I played Hackmaster. I played Blades in the Dark. I played a couple of Apocalypse World systems, and I've read a ton more systems than that. Um, I've been trying to find the right system for playing a Chinese a story set in China with like magic and mechanics based around Chinese mythology.
Ooh, that would be pretty. I saw when you kind of gave me the little blurb about you. You were talking about you've been listening or reading a lot of Chinese history and stuff like that. How's that been?
The Chinese history stuff. Right now, I'm listening
Yeah.
to a podcast about Chinese tea, like the history of the development of tea, which is sort of from like a technology perspective. Like initially, people just had green tea, and then there was this one time, like the method for producing like real good black tea um, is basically where you need to beat the leaves and like crunch them up a little bit. Um,
Uh-huh.
that helps the oxidation occur throughout the leaf instead of just at the edges, because then there's like
Huh.
breaks in the skin of the leaf.
Right.
And tea was almost used as a currency at one point. So and there was a roving army that was going by, and these villagers quickly harvested all of tea so the army wouldn't take it, and then they covered it with blankets so the soldiers wouldn't see it when they were walking through the village.
Uh-huh.
So the soldiers come in and they shout out, bring us all your gold, bring us all your food, all your wine. And they see all these nice blankets on top of vegetation, and they think, oh, we'll just sleep here on top of these nice mattresses that you've prepared for us. And the army stayed there for a week, sleeping on top of the tea for a week. And in their sleep, were rolling around, fidgeting,
Right.
and crushed the tea leaves so that they oxidized into black tea. And the villagers thought, oh God, all of our tea has been ruined. What are we going to do? And then some European comes along and says, I'll take all your tea. I want to buy tea. I want tea. I don't care what it is.
Right.
So the Europeans buy all the black tea. And then 3 months later come back and say, that black tea was really good. Can you get me some more of that? And then thus black tea was born.
That's crazy.
And prior to that, there was things that were like black tea from aging the leaves so that they oxidized a little bit, but it wasn't as refined as the black teas that we have now.
So funny that's how that came to be. That's wild. So what have you just always been interested in history in general, or what got you into diving into Chinese history?
Yeah, I have been. I was initially really interested in Greek history, and I plumbed the well as deep as it was possible to go, really, outside of reading every single original source material.
Right, right.
And so then I started moving on to other stuff. I mean, everybody kind of gets Rome through school, so I'd already gotten that. I did Russia for a bit, and that was all right. And I've been doing China lately because I feel like it's a history that you don't get much of within the Western world.
Yeah, I would agree. And
Yeah.
the parts that you do get are really like, I don't know how to put it. It's different.
It's very, very broad strokes what we get through
Yes.
our education in like ancient history courses in school. So I wanted more than that. And I'd already got some of it for like the Han Dynasty. So I wanted more than just the Han Dynasty. And the Han Dynasty is great stuff. And Three Kingdoms is also great. Those periods I consumed a lot about. And the other periods end up being more historical instead of like fantastical good stories.
Right.
And the good stories that exist tend to be a little like, is this true or not?
Gotcha.
Because Chinese histories tend to be written by the next dynasty about the previous one. And the next dynasty has a very strong political interest to portray the previous dynasty as a bunch of evil sacks of dirt.
Right. That's interesting. I did not know that about them. They don't really keep their own histories?
I mean, the victor gets to control that. So like, yeah, they might have written something, and the initial emperors end up getting their stuff in the historical record and it stays, but then the last 2 or 3 emperors end up, oh, this guy was a cannibal, or this guy, slept around with a bunch of people, or this guy went on hunting trips constantly and was never around actually governing. Or it's all stuff that feels exaggerated.
Yeah, I could understand that.
Yeah, and I don't actually want to discount the cannibal one because actually cannibalism is way more common in China than Europe. But
really,
yes, cannibalism in China does not have as much of a social ick factor as Europe and the West.
I knew that was the case with like Southeast Asia, but I didn't know that it was like.
Yeah, I think it's a little strange that it like in the West there's like this, like if there's this feeling of like, tar and feathering someone, like a leader has done something you disapprove of, so you bring them out of their little office and you humiliate them, and now they're no longer a problem. There are many records of Chinese eating the official they don't like.
I wonder why. Is there like an explanation why?
They're hungry.
Oh, Okay, fair. I guess if you're not being a good leader, your people are hungry and they're gonna eat you. Okay.
Yeah. And it's I uh I don't want to treat it like, Chinese are cannibals and they're all
Oh
terrible. It's
yeah,
just it seems like it is more often used as uh, a option that many people in the West would not consider much faster.
that's quite interesting. And no, I wasn't taking it as you were saying the Chinese are all cannibals, right? I understand that the context in which we're
Yeah.
story.
But trying to find like a Chinese RPG, I found one called Hearts of Wulin that I think is really great for telling Chinese stories. It's a apocalypse world system that has stats based around the Chinese magic system of having 5 elements.
Oh, that's cool. What was that? Hearts of what?
Hearts of Wulin.
Wulin.
Wulin means like magic martial arts or something.
Gotcha. So what prompted you to start doing a podcast?
Um, I felt like when you're doing a D&D campaign, often you don't get to present it to the outside world. Right, you make a D&D campaign and a setting and you play it with your friends,
Mm-hmm.
4, 5, 6, whatever number. And that's your audience and that's all the people that get exposed to it. And even within that group, often the players will see maybe 10% of what you have created and thought of in your head.
Yeah.
Because, you'll have like a motivation for a villain that doesn't come up. You'll create an adventure and then your players will say, actually want to go this way instead.
Yeah.
Maybe not that extreme, but you'll outline an adventure at least.
Oh
And your
no,
players won't
it
go
is
to it.
no, it's absolutely that extreme. We literally in this last campaign that we've been doing, we spent about a month talking about what we want to do for the next campaign. The next campaign being this last one that we've been doing, the whole rebellion. And I passed down some different ideas of things like areas of the world that I was willing to flesh out and explore within an adventure, and some like options of different types of adventures we can do in those various areas. And eventually we came down to the idea of doing the rebellion in Rykor after a month of deliberation of finding this out. And then we spent another 2 months just prepping the character preparation thing, creating the characters, figuring out how they were tied together, like where all this was starting, like how exactly they want to go about the revolution, like why are they doing a revolution, all that stuff. And then we spent another probably 3 months playing it and actually like getting the revolution kicked off and like doing like kind of showing a little bit of the underhandedness of the current government and why a revolution might need to be started and all that stuff to the characters and the players. And then after all of that, right before they actually like officially call themselves rebels and like break out of the government prison and whatnot, one of the players goes, yeah, I don't really know what the motivations of my character for actually being part of a revolution are, so I don't know if I'm actually going to go through with this.
Oh no.
I was just like, hang on a second. Wait just a minute. We have been doing this for 7 months now. That this was the entire plan for this whole adventure we're about to do, and your character doesn't want to be part of a revolution. Uh, it's just one of those things.
Yeah, I've had that occasionally happen, but typically I'll um, check in with my players and be like, hey, where do you want to go next? And then I'll be able to actually design that instead of just outline the adventure.
Yeah.
Ugh. But yeah, I think there's been one or two where I've designed something and they just didn't go to it. Anyways, point being that when you're working as a DM, you're creating something that's cool and creative, and it's for a small audience, and the audience is also not fully appreciating it. not in like a bad way, but like it's just
Right.
they can't, right?
Yeah, it's genuinely not possible. Nobody's
Yeah.
going to enjoy your setting as much
Yeah.
or be as invested.
Yeah, exactly. Like my players have not gone to every location within my setting. That there's a town that one of them was from that we never went to that town. We know that they're from
Right.
it, but we never actually went there. So that made me think of the podcast as a way to have a unique D&D podcast that presents something that is valuable for the guest and hopefully valuable for the audience. That's the part that isn't as well figured out, but
I mean, as like a world builder myself and a GM, I am always super interested in hearing about like what other people do with their stuff. So at least for those that are like me in the audience, it's definitely worthwhile information. And like not even necessarily information like educationally, but like from an entertainment standpoint as well.
yeah, and I think a lot of my audience is dungeon masters. I don't know because how would I actually know that?
Right.
But my assumption is that the people listening to the podcast are people that have been on it in the past, maybe some of their players, and then other DMs that are using it as, fuel for their own creation stuff.
Yeah.
It's not a super big podcast because it feels like it's a niche within a niche. But and I don't know. It's fun to have these conversations. It's fun to edit up an episode and release it. I like it.
Nice. Well, as long as you get value out of it, that's all. That's really all that matters.
Yeah. Well, it's cool. I got to talk with you for 3 hours about D&D and have a great time.
I hope you enjoyed it, and I didn't bore you too much.
No, this is great, man. Well, I always finish off with asking for a bit of DM advice for other people. So, do you have anything you want to say there?
Ooh, I think the biggest advice, like if I were to go back and tell myself back when I started DMing, biggest advice I would give to me or anybody else is run the game you want to run with the people you want to run it and the people that are going to be okay with it. Because a genuine product coming from you is going to be way better than a non-genuine product that you're struggling with for the sake of others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you want to have alignment on what you're doing.
And I guess it also boils down to make sure you're having fun too.
Yes, definitely.
You're also a player and you matter.
That is an important thing. All right, well, thanks, Todd. It's been great talking with you about the Skjaald Sagas, and I hope the upcoming tests go well.
Sounds good.
All right, I'll catch you later, Todd. Good night.
Yep. You have a good night.
If you like learning about Skjaald Sagas, you can learn more at Todd's World Anvil page or by checking out the playtest mechanics. Both of these are in the episode description. And if you just enjoyed listening, then I'd really appreciate you leaving a review. Thank you for listening.